Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today, and welcome to this SBL webinar on the September 2025 exams. My name is Hazel McLucas, and I work as an Education Partner Support Manager here at ACCA. And our session, the Examiner's Report Unlocked, will provide an in-depth exploration of the latest March-June 2025 examiner reports and uncover strategies to boost your performance. Sean Purcell has joined us today to deliver this session and to help explore common pitfalls and share essential technical points with examples. During the session, Sean will also guide on how to effectively use exam practice resources such as marking guides and sample answers, and how to present your exam responses clearly and confidently. And we'll also cover some live questions coming from you in the Q&A box. Before I hand over to Sean, I'd like to briefly run through a few housekeeping items. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen there are a number of buttons you can use. So there's a help icon that provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There's icons for both the slides and the media player, and you'll need both of these during the webinar, so make sure you have them selected now. There's an attendee chat function, so you can engage with your fellow webinar attendees, but please note you should not be sharing any personal details in that chat. There's also a resource list, and if you click on this, you'll be able to access resources relevant to today's webinars, including some direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit and resize the windows if you need to, and if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or see any of the visuals, the best thing to do is refresh your browser. Registering for today's webinar means you'll be sent an email tomorrow with details on how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or you have any technical issues, you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Sean in a moment, and I will be back with you towards the end of the session. But if you'd like to ask Sean or ACC a question, then please post them in the Q&A section on your screen. Please note we can't guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or in the web chat, but we hope that the questions we select today will be helpful for everyone. And so now I'll hand over to you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Hazel, and hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we're going to look at key things to help you make sure you give the best account of yourself in the September 2025 exam. Yep. So in terms of what we're going to look at, we're going to look at, amongst other things, at the examiner's report. In terms of my ability to talk to you about these things, I've worked with the ACCA as an expert tutor on SBL for quite a while. I'm a qualified accountant like you, and have worked with the education and examination team for probably 25 years on SBL and the various incarnations of it. So hopefully I can give you a lot of insight to the way examiners think and the way your exam will get marked. In terms of what we're going to look at, I'm going to start by looking at the examiner's reports. I'm going to then go and look at the practice platform, mention a tiny bit about the syllabus because some of you have asked about that, but there's not much to say. And then remind you about exam strategies that you need to embrace to overcome some of the things identified in the examiner's report that students aren't doing so well on. So let's first of all look at the examiner's report. Hopefully you also look at the examiner's reports. If I was to summarize why are the examiner reports relevant, well, I personally think they're probably the most valuable thing provided by the ACCA. A lot of people will ask me, what are the tips for the exam? My tip for the exam would be to look at the examiner report. Why would I say that? Well, because the examiner in their report will say this isn't being done very well, this isn't being done very well, and knowledge in here is lacking. And because that has been identified, that is going to get questioned again. Yeah. So there's your tip in the examiner's report. And the things that are definitely going to come up in the exam are the things that the examiner says are not being done very well. So there's no better tip than that. So please, if you're not familiar, you can look at the examiner reports on the ACCA platform. They go back a few years. If you read them in a lot of depth, like I do, you'll see that a lot of them repeat themselves. And the reason people repeat themselves, or reason the examiner repeats himself, is that people don't take notice of them. So please, please have a look. I'm going to have a look at the latest one for the March-June 2025, but I would encourage you to look at the others as well. Okay, so this is the one I'm going to look at. This is what you can find on the ACCA platform. Please, please make yourself familiar with all the great resources on the ACCA platform. That has had the eyes of the examining and education team look at it. They do not look at random people on Facebook or YouTube unless they are approved learning providers. Stick with the ACCA would be my advice. So in terms of what happened and what were the key things going wrong in the examiner's report, well, basically the examiner identified good and bad. So let's start with the bad. A lot of people didn't answer the question set. Why would that be, I wonder? Well, because they didn't read the question properly. I'll talk more how to deal with that later. People didn't use the information in the exhibits. That's why it's given. Often, the HP, it was called historic palaces. So the abbreviation of HP is historic palaces, which is the case scenario on which the examiner report is based on. And it's very important when we're dealing in the SBL exam that we deal with the context of the question, and we just make sure it always relates back to it rather than just randomly regurgitate theory, which sadly gets no marks. And answers often lacked depth. Yeah, your job is to give insight and a bit more depth. So that's what was going wrong. And this happens every time. The examiner's report mention it every time. Copying and pasting of pre-seen material. You've got to understand that the markers know the pre-seen material inside out. If you copy and paste it, they know you've copied and pasted it. Don't forget, this is a practical exam where you behave like you should do in the workplace. Can you imagine doing that in the workplace? You wouldn't look very smart. So please don't do it in the exam. Yep. So they were poor answers. What did good answers do? Well, they basically integrated the exhibits and the pre-seen. They applied it to historic palaces. They, appropriately used the professional skills marks, and their answers weren't just a random machine gun attack. They were logical and structured. Yeah, all advice that the ACCA gives. If you look at other webinars, you can see them on the official ACCA YouTube channel. I know that advice is given because I've delivered some of those webinars. A good thing, I think, that came out of this particular report was time management was okay, but time management is a perpetual problem students struggle with. I will mention a tiny bit about that later on. So what were the main issues in summation? Well, it basically says that in the syllabus guidance, it talks about, we should read articles and other resources on the website. Had students done that for this particular exam, they would have been fully familiar with an article on the principles and applications of e-marketing. Task 2A asked that particular question. And yeah, it would have also been helpful on task 3, where there was also an article on financial analysis. That would have been on 2A, I beg your pardon. So the point is, it's not a technical exam, it's an applied exam. And the articles and other information that ACCA on their platform point you to under the SBL section are not to be ignored. Okay, that would be my advice there. What else? Well, what I want to do is go and have a look at the report. I appreciate some of you might not have digested it yet, but please may this be a little dig in the ribs for you after this presentation to go and digest it in full. I'm going to pick on a couple of points that were raised. The first one is about task one. So with the scenario was about a charity that preserved ancient buildings. In the UK, we have something called the National Trust, but something along those lines. And in task one, we were asked to prepare a report that discusses the contextual features of historic palaces, which the chief executive needs to consider when implementing her proposed changes. Yeah. So what are the features of historic palaces she needs to consider when implementing her proposed changes? And you were given professional skills marks for communication by clarifying the contextual features she needs to consider. So in case you didn't get it in the requirements for 14 marks, it is, doubled up in the professional skills, contextual features. Yep. So if I was to give you a brief indication how you would deal with a question like this, well, what you would be doing, you would be thinking contextual features. And because you have familiarized yourself with the ACCA SBL syllabus, you would know about a model called the Balogun-Hope-Haley model, which is about contextual features of change, which basically means the success of a change is dependent or contextual on things such as time, scope, preservation, diversity, capability, capacity, readiness, power. Yeah, that would be a great framework, and that would be what I would hope you would have used. Yep. But I'll show you. What you weren't supposed to do was regurgitate the Balogun-Hope-Haley model. No marks for that, and that doesn't look very professional. Yeah, it's application to historical palaces. And so, for example, if we were thinking about what would it depend on? Will it be depending on preservation? Yeah, and what we would want, is preserve the current objectives, and they were, unfortunately they use the word preservation again, but keeping the old buildings in good condition. That's what it was about. So if the change is going to really work, we would need to make sure that our objective of keeping old buildings in good condition was maintained. We would also need to work out whether the volunteers that work in this charity and the employees that work for the charity have the capability to change. Have they received training? Do they have enough information? Do they have enough skills to embrace this change? That's what change is often contextual on. And also, would it be a big shock for the employees? Are they ready? Do they realize that change needs to happen? Or if they're not ready, it's going to be a big problem because it's going to be too much of a shock for the system. So that would be there's some examples of what I would use from the Balogun-Hope-Haley model. However, remember, there was 14 marks there. So I'm going to say more than just those 3 points. Okay. So we need to, don't need to get 14 out of 14, but we need to get more than 50%. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation of what to do, because a model provides you with a great framework. Yeah. If you have a good framework, you basically have something to hold on to when you are working through your question. Okay. So just to summarize again, model is a great catalyst to generate ideas. The model, though, should not be actually mentioned in the exam. Okay. What else? Well, what students didn't do in this exam was develop their points. Yeah, they didn't say how it would impact on the change. That's what the question asked, but they maybe just talked about the contextual features of change. It didn't talk about how it would be impacted. Yeah, and that was required. So really, really important that you do that. What else would I say? Well, what did students do? And you probably won't believe this, because in the panic of exams, people do crazy things. And I'll talk about how to avoid panic in exams a little later. But students focused on the benefits and drawbacks of the change. The question didn't ask that, but that's what students did. Maybe that was their learned, prepared model. Well, it got no marks. Answers focused on, question on change. Let's bring in Lewin, unfreeze, change, refreeze. Well, that's fine when we're talking about the process of change, but that wasn't what the question asked. So Lewin had no relevance here, but people thought, let's throw it in, we might get some marks. It was about internal features. So why would you use an external model like Pastel? Well, if you used it, you wouldn't get any marks. Yep. So contextual features are features within the organization that could impact on the change. Pastel are external features. So in this situation, not relevant. Okay. So you're not going to get any marks from that, and you're just going to waste your time. So sadly, that's what students did. Doesn't matter what they did. What matters is you take on board what the examiner said, you reflect on what others did so that you don't do that in your exam. So on task 1A, people didn't focus on the contextual factors. There was no requirement for talking about benefits and drawbacks. There was very poor depth on contextual factors. It was talking about, how it could impact on the CEO's program of changes. And some people did talk about contextual factors, but only talked about a couple. And by doing that, they were not basically looking at the marking scheme. Yeah. So there are other things. I'm going to look at another question, but before I do look at each of these, I'm going to look at the professional skills marks. Yeah. So how professional were you in delivering your answers? And if you were well structured around something like the contextual features, that would be a script that would get higher professional skills marks. Yeah. But if it was a bit of a haphazard, unclear, then but it wasn't just about producing in a report format. Please don't think that all of the professional skills marks will be given if you do it in report format. You need to review other great resources the ACCA have on professional skills marks to just, see a bit more on that. So let's have a look at task 2 as another indicator of what people did wrong. So on task 2, you were asked to prepare a report for the board which compares financial and non-financial performance of the two sites and discuss reasons for and implications of the results of the comparisons, of the comparisons between them. For you got 18 marks, with professional skills marks being given for analysis skills, where you were looking at the financial and non-financials and the differences between them, the comparison. Yeah. So if I was looking at that, what do I see? I see 18 marks. I see half and half. The marking scheme would probably be something like up to 11 marks for financial, up to 11 for non-financial, maximum of 18. That's typically how it goes. What would I recommend you do? Well, be clear so that there is identification of what you're talking about is financial and what is non-financial. That would be important. Another important thing, that you actually did what the question asked and you did a comparison. I'll show you what people did in reality in a moment. It's not enough to say, oh, figures have gone up or they've gone down. People can work that out. That's not a strategic professional level of skill. And you need to give an insight into those figures and say, what is the reason they may have moved, or suggest what reason might be there for why they've moved. What else do we need to do? Well, we need to maybe on our points, need to develop them by a good tip would be, when you made a point, so what? Why did you make that point? Why is that point a relevant point? And what is the consequence of the point you've just made? Because that just develops your answer a little bit more. Yeah. So that's a real, so what, why, what is the consequence of what I have just said? So what did students do? Let's reflect and learn. So what students did, sadly, the first thing they did, they were given figures, but that wasn't enough for some students. And what those students did was additional calculations. They also made recommendations on where they could improve. That wasn't asked for also. So why were they doing that? And despite being asked to make comparisons, they didn't make any comparisons. And then a lot of people just copy and pasted the numbers. Great, you're good at copying and pasting. That's great, but it's not relevant to getting any marks in SBL, so you wouldn't get anything for that. And sometimes, think you're a strategic professional and say, oh yeah, they're a bit better, they're not quite so good. That's not the language of a qualified strategic business leader, accountant, or a consultant If you were employed as a consultant, which you often are in SBL, and you're reporting to the CEO and say, yeah, the questions are the figures are a bit better, they're a bit worse. That's not enough. We've got to give insight. We've got to give explanations. Yeah. And there were quite a few students who talked about things that, inflation would have an impact on both companies. They're both exposed to similar things. So it wasn't really that relevant. Yeah. What else went wrong? Well, if we just summarize what went wrong, you said the figures have gone up or down. You hadn't explained what happened to them. You maybe didn't contextualize the figures. What else was going on in the scenario, in the tasks that may have led? Was there extra spending? I know we're not fully familiar, all of us, with historic palaces, but when you go back and have a look, that's what I'd suggest you do. There were 18 marks here, so focusing on a single reason wasn't appropriate. Oh, sorry, I just jumped it a bit quickly there. What about the professional skills? Well, again, not enough depth. There wasn't really a structured approach giving a comparison, and a lot of candidates didn't integrate the two slides and kept them separately. It was about comparison. And if you didn't do a comparison, you didn't answer the question and you didn't really get any marks. Okay? So that is there is a taster of the examiner's report. If you look at it, it's quite long. There's lots of great advice and information in there. Please have a look at it. Yeah. Far better spending some time on the ACCA platform looking at that than listening to someone on Facebook who the ACCA doesn't know who they are and has no approval of what they write. So what we're going to talk about next? I'm going to talk about the ACCA practice platform. Yeah. And on the practice platform, I'm hoping that you are using it. If you are not familiar with it, these are all the SBL exams that you can assign to yourself on the practice platform. These are the exams you can work through. These are the exams you can then look at marking schemes for. If this is all news to you, well, they're a great resource. Get on with looking at them, please. I'm going to demonstrate some of the things on there. So what we have here, this is the exam that I've just referred to in the examiner's report on historic palaces. Here we can see that we have the exhibits, which you click like you do in the real exam on the left. You then have the pre-seen material and you have a task 1. You can see there on the left. So if I clicked on task 1, this is what I get. You can see the 14 marks and the 4 professional marks. And then we didn't talk about task 1B, but that was 12 and 4. So yeah, there you can see that's what you get. What you can then do, you can work through it. And once you've worked through it, so say we've worked through and answered task 1A, we can then have a look at a suggested answer to task 1A. Remember, though, that these answers are probably bigger than would be expected to be delivered by students. You can see right at the top, they're intended to support revision. They're not an expectation of a student delivery, so always remember that. But here we go. It's talking about scope, preservation, diversity. And just so you understand the nature of how SBL is marked, because it's an applied exam, there is a broad church of answers that could be given credit. And you can see above the typical things that could get credit. But, you could say more than that. And often credit is given for any reasonable suggestion. Here, those answers would come much more easily if you'd applied contextual features of change. If you're not sure about the discriminatory marks given on professional skills marks, look at the marking grid and it tells you where the candidates doesn't get any marks, not at all, and where they get really good marks. Yeah, and the reason you see 0.33 and 0.66 is so the marker has to either say you're more professional or less professional. You can't sit in the middle on 2. You either get a 1.66 or a 1.33 or a 2.66. Yep, so that's a little explanation when the professional skills marks were being developed. Anyway, that was a long time ago. I remember those discussions back in 2016, and that's why they were made. So please, please, please have a look at the practice platform. It's been updated. It's now called iAssess, and it's highly recommended you go and play on there. Okay. What else do we have here? Well, here just an example of the question we dealt with on the examiner's report, question 2A. It's here, 18 marks for professional marks. It talks about financial, and it talks about how we would discuss these financial and non-financial things. We use a subheading. Again, your job is to go and digest this and look at the language, look at how they actually answer the question asked. They use comparison. So you can see in the first line here, both sites has the same price rise, but the impact of it was different. For Stowater, there was no impact. The price rise was a fall in. So anyway, there's a comparison going on there. I appreciate we might not be fully familiar, but please, after this, go and have a look. In the same way, on 1A, we got marking kind of schemes. We've got that again for 2A. So, where you could get marks for, and when you are self-marking, this is often quite useful. Yep. So make sure you do that. A couple of people have asked about syllabus updates. Now on SBL, well, let me say a little bit about syllabus updates on SBL. And basically you need to remember that SBL is an exam where you're behaving as a strategic leader. The SBL is a practical exam, not a technical exam. So it's not like a tax exam or an accounting exam where tax laws change, where accounting standards change. It's much bigger than that. Yeah. And you're asked to, adopt a role-playing exercise in this exam. So you can, if you want to look at syllabus changes, go on to the ACCA website. It mentions it there, but there's never any big changes. Even if you haven't been studying SBL for a while, the changes are often minor wording changes because it's not a technical exam, it's the big picture. Yeah, and I think the syllabus has slightly changed to embrace the recent refocus of the ACCA examinations. So, if you've been maintaining contact with ACCA, you would know that there was a recent change in what was going on, and it was, a slightly different focus, and that's reflected in the new syllabus, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so we've looked at the examiner's report. We've seen what the examiner has said, which he wasn't a big fan of and he wants improvement on. What I want to look at now are things that you should do to make sure you don't fall into the same trap as students did in the June exam on which the report was written about. Okay, so, or the March-June exam on which the report was based on. So if I was to read, which I have to, we used to sit in examiner meetings maybe 20 years ago. I've been at every examiner meeting and digested every single report. I've presented on quite a number of them. And what tends to come in those reports is there is, in pretty much all of them, it was evidential that some students failed to manage their time. That's going to kill you. As was in the last report, people didn't answer the question asked. As in the last report, they didn't focus on the marks awarded and not adding value in the points made. These crimes are committed in every single SBL exam. So we need to do something about it. So I'm going to briefly talk on how we can make sure we don't suffer under each of those headings. Yep. So time management. I have talked about this elsewhere. You will find a presentation on this elsewhere, but just let me remind you very quickly about time management. In terms of how many minutes we have in the exam, we have 3 hours, 15 minutes, okay, 195 minutes. If we, and you don't have to do this, but for argument's sake, let's spend about 35 reading and planning. That leaves us with 160 minutes of those 195, okay? The 20 professional skills marks take no time to acquire. It's about how you present things. Yep. So we divide not by 100, but by 80. So if you want a rough rule of thumb, if you're spending about 30, 35 minutes reading and planning, you're looking at about 2 minutes a mark as a budget, how you are going to deal with the SBL exam. Okay, so that would be my recommendation. So if we have a question which is 8 marks, we would multiply 2 by 8, and that would take us 16 minutes. And my advice would be that you actually write down your start and your finish time on your exam papers so that you don't delude yourself. Okay, so that would be very important from my perspective. Yeah, that's what I would do. You're not going to make a mistake. But what I want to do now is show you what students do who misuse their time in the exam. So I have done this on another presentation, but you may or may not have seen it, but I think it's very important to remind you. So if we argued that, yeah, there's 3 tasks, which there always is on your exam, and we spend about a third of the time on each task, this is a great student who does that. They do task 1, they stop, they do task 2, they stop, they do task 3, and they stop. Yeah. The point I would make to you, though, is that when we are answering exams, if we, what is very important is that the first or the mark score per minute is going to be higher for the first 50% than it is for the latter 50%. Yeah, so you're going to score more. You're going to get the first 50% of the marks much easier than the later 50%. So you need to put yourself in a position where you get those easy marks on task 1, task 2, and task 3. Okay, that's your job. That's what you need to do. However, in the real exam, students who don't manage their time end up like this. They start task 1, which is great, but because they don't manage their time, they can say a little bit more. I can get some more marks. And they spend a bit longer in the task 1 area. And what happens? Instead of leaving here, they go a bit further and spend a bit longer eating into the time which should have been allocated to task 2. Okay, they now start task 2. Okay, however, they start it late and they spend the allocated time for task 2, which is going well into task 3, but they still don't manage their time and they can get a few more marks on task 2 and they spend a little bit longer on there. Well, you can see what's going to happen, hopefully. They start now task 3 very late. The third red line is where the exam is going to stop. So they start task 3. Unfortunately, they don't have time to finish the exam and they give a poor account of themselves on task 3. So what happens? Well, they do quite well on task 1. They get 21 out of 33. They don't do bad on task 2. They get 19 out of 33. So far, they've got about 40 out of 66, which is fine. It's a good pass. But because they didn't get those easy first 50% of task 3 because they didn't manage their time, they don't get many marks for task 3 and they get 4. So they fail with 44. Yeah, that's what they do. They get 44, which sadly is a big fail. Yeah, so it might seem pedantic, but what you have to do at the end of the time allocated is extract yourself from the exam. Because you've got enough marks, go on and get the easier marks on the later questions. If you hang around thinking you're going to get 100%, you're deluded. Okay? So please take that on board. Right. What else do I want to say about maximizing marks in the SBL exam? Well, let's have a look at how we would approach requirements. The first thing I want to talk about in approaching requirements is people who get stressed. Okay? People do get stressed. It's natural. If that is you, they're, well, forewarned is forearmed, and you can do things about stress. Yeah, ACCA, go on, there's like a health and wellness part of the website, lots of great videos, have a look. How do I make sure that I don't misread the question? My advice would be you read it once, the requirement side is you read it twice. Okay, do a brainstorm, you do a mark focus, a rough plan of what you're going to do. I would do this on my actual answer paper, title it answer, and then I'd read it a third time just to check that my plan and the requirements I read are the same thing, because sometimes we get tunnel vision and we see the wrong thing. So make sure you do that. What else? Remember that ACCA SBL is about synthesis. It's about connecting. It's about contextualizing. It's not about regurgitating theory. By all means, use theories, but you will not get marks for brain dumping them, and use those theories as a catalyst. Yeah, use them as a catalyst. Also, it's important that as well as using them as a catalyst, you frame your answers in the marks available, and you frame them with a so what, you frame them with a why, you frame them with a consequence, and you try and, it's historic palaces. Let me try and think about this in the context of what I know about in my country. Yeah, always try and visualize, always trying to picture it. Yeah, what's the story here? What does it tell? Yeah, normally we would have been alerted to the industry. Well, but we will always be alerted to the industry from the pre-seen material. So you should have familiarity with what's going on. Yeah. So just to recap, understand the pre-seen material, understand the task. Who are you? Who are you talking to? What's the format? What's the verb? And what are the professional skills marks? Important. Yeah, you need to do that. Professional skills marks as well, key. And don't copy and paste like the examiner says students do every time. Okay, what else? Do a so what, do a why, do a what is a consequence of what I've just said. Don't just like say things without contextualizing them. Yeah, you won't get any marks for that. The markers only mark one question. So if you're repeating parts, that will be very apparent. If you get stressed, go onto the ACCA website and have a look at the kind of health and well-being stuff. Okay, so there's a lot I've said there. That is a recap of what I want you to do. Also, get lots of sleep and stay hydrated. Your brain, for it to function appropriately, needs water. Okay, and if we're not drinking water, we're not helping our brain. Okay, so lots and lots of stuff there. What I want to do now is start and have a look at some of your questions. So I'm just going to go back right to the beginning of questions that have been, set out for me. First one from William. Thanks for your question, William. Can you bullet point things if you're running out of time, and would you still get marks? Yes, William, but on a bullet point, you're not fully explaining yourself, and you're asking the marker to interpret what you mean and infer by that bullet point. My point would be the markers are not paid to infer or interpret. They're paid to give you marks for what you say. So better not to use bullet points would be my advice. Do multiple exhibits need to be used to answer one question? Yes, Raymond, they could be. There's no hard and fast. It's not exhibit one is going to be task one. That's what you're being examined on, your ability to digest, absorb, understand information, and then use that information to deal with the tasks. So it's not some simple connect task one to exhibit one. That is the skill of synthesis that's being tested. Muskan, SBL exam marking scheme is 2 marks per point or 1 mark per point. It's up to 2 marks per point, Muskan. But for you to get to, so some students come to me and they give me, they failed SBL a few times, and they give me an answer, and I say, well, it's 10 marks there. Give me 4 points. And they say, yeah, my tutor told me 2 marks per point. And I say, your tutor isn't wrong, but to get 2 marks per point, you have to give a proper, developed, applied, contextual point, and then follow it through for a mark, and then follow it through with a so what, or why, what's the consequence of what I've just said for an extra mark. That's when you get 2 marks. But to get 1 mark, you can't just copy and paste. You need to give insight, you need to add value, you need to give context to the point you've made. Okay, so there's no hard, if you develop your point, you'll get 2. But if I'm honest, not many students do great points and develop them. So I think if I was being prudent and it was a 10-mark question, I'd give 6 points. Hopefully I can turn some of those 6 points into 2 marks or 6 separate little paragraphs, but don't bank on it always. Anisha, what should be the SBL approach for that? I'll talk about that in a moment, Anisha. I would say consolidating your knowledge, going onto the SBL platform, practicing questions, see if you can get someone who can mark those questions for you and give you some feedback on what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well. Maybe try and find a study buddy who is as ambitious to pass their SBL as you are. How relevant it is to identify the model. I've heard it's not required. Lloyd, all a model is a summation of academic research based on what's going on in the workplace. That's what a model is. So you've got lots of experience in the workplace. You're correct. A model is not required, but my advice to you, as someone who's probably relatively junior in the workplace, most people, are starting out in their careers when doing exams, you might not have that experience, and a model is a great catalyst to develop your ideas. Yeah. What's my approach to the analysis of the pre-scene from NER? To be honest, there's a 45-minute video that I recorded that's on the ACCA website that you can digest. So I would encourage you to go and look at that. It's in big, bold letters on the website. Please make yourself familiar with all the great resources the ACCA make available to you. The thing is, though, you have to go on the website to see them. William, if I'm running out of time, can I bullet point in a structure? Yes. Again, I think I've dealt with the bullet point thing. If you're managing your time, you won't run out of time. Is it recommended to read all the tasks at the beginning or go task by task? No, I would read all the tasks at the beginning before I read the exhibits. So I then read the exhibits with purpose. They're not just random. Yeah. How do I suggest we allocate our time studying? I think maybe you asked that question before I answered it, Erica. So hopefully that's fine. Amaka, how many points are required for each? Discuss relevant. Well, there's normally up to 2 marks per point, but as I've just said, those 2 mark answers are very well developed, and not every student does that. How do you develop a professional tone? Matt Solar. Well, if you were to talk to, maybe you're asked to address an HR director and you talk about EBITDA and accrual, that language is a foreign language to someone in HR, and that's not professional. Yeah, there's a whole lot again on the ACCA website on what is meant by professional, but as a professional, you wouldn't say, oh, what an idiot. You would say, oh, may I draw your attention that some of your statements might require further confirmation. Don't say you're an idiot, but how you would talk in the workplace, Matt Sola. Malalo, do I have to work for task 1, task 2, and then 3, or can I use any order? You can use whatever order you want. All questions are compulsory. There's no benefit of doing question 2 before question 1, and often question 2 follows on from what you were talking about in question 1. So my advice on looking at pretty much all the exams that have been set on SBL would be to just do it in the order they're set and manage your time for each of those questions. Shakti, when I did SBL last time, I scored 45. What should I do to pass? Take on board all those things I've said. People fail, as I said, to poor time management, not reading the question, not answering the question asked, not contextualizing their points, regurgitating theory. All those bits of advice I've given are what you need to do. Denise, do we get half marks? No half marks in SBL. Are we supposed to make tables for risk and mitigating actions? So you might be. There was a heat map required that freaked a lot of people out, but anything reasonable. It was in a specimen paper. If you look back and familiarize yourself, it was in there. Anything reasonable was given credit. It was a question that's like, put it on a heat map. Oh my God, I never learned a heat map. Well, what do you know about the area of risk? You know about impact, and you know about likelihood. There you go, that'll do. Cynthia, Would I plan all answers in the beginning? I would definitely plan my answers, Cynthia, yes. But the plan is for you, it's not to be marked. Yeah. So it just has to be brief and mean something to you. I'm not sure. Someone says this. So Ishrat said the slide question in the exam. Is there any way of going around it? I don't quite know what you mean. Is there any way of avoiding it? If you avoid it, you get no marks. Your boss asks you to apply slides in the workplace. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't think you would be popular. So no way of going around it. Kamaji, last time I scored 44. Where should I improve? I think I've answered that to someone else. Josh, how much detail should I include in slide notes compared to emails? I think a good point. The marks for slide answers are given in the notes. Bullet point in the slide, explanation of that bullet point in the note. Use a subheading using the bullet point to help the marker navigate what you're saying. Ross, if finding yourself short on time, would it be recommended to close out your report with the formal closure to help get professional marks? There's never normally a lot of marks, Ross, for introductions and conclusions. So I wouldn't be spending too much time on that. If you're managing your time, you won't be running short of time. If you break it into manageable chunks, so there's an 8-mark question, 2 times 8 is 16 minutes, that should facilitate good time management. Sarah, this is my first attempt. I feel nervous and sometimes I feel zero, like I didn't learn. What should you do? Go into the ACCA platform where there's lots of advice to deal with stress and breathing exercises and that kind of thing. So there's some great questions I've answered. I was thinking there was I've answered those quite quickly, but hopefully I've answered them well and you understand what I've said. If I haven't, please come back to me and say, look, well, I'd like you to tell me a bit more about this, and I will try to. But let me have a quick look in the inbox if anything's come through since then. So I just got one from Siam saying that they didn't pass. How can I pinpoint my weak areas? You've got to go on the platform. You've got to look at the marking scheme. Ideally, it would be good to get someone to mark your scripts. You say that there's a mismatch. The Study Hub says we should write answers to concise points. It's debatable how long they should be. It's about the quality, not the quantity. Yeah, as I've said, the model answers are very long. I think I've explained that. If you look at the model answers, it clearly says these are not an expectation of what students should deliver, but these have a tutorial purpose. So that's dealing with that. If the question one has 2 parts, A and B, can we use the same word page for both parts, or is there an option for second page? Well, it just, again, you need to practice on the platforms now and get used to it, get used to the functionality of the platform by going onto it. Is ACA planning to pre-brief on the pre-scene to be released? I think they are. There is a webinar I think I'm doing on that, so look out for that. All information on ACCA is on the ACCA website. Tusha said, if I've got a mediocre answer and I add a conclusion, will that beef up the marks? Personally, the meat of the marks will be in the main body of the answer. Don't expect too much marks for flamboyant presentation of reports and stuff, would be my advice. Hassan, are there videos on how to plan answers in the exam? There's lots of videos on the ACCA website, Hassan. Please go on to the ACCA answer. Yeah, and please use professional skills marks as the lens through which you interpret that answer. The structure writing the second slide, if you're talking to the notes page, is where you get the marks. So you need to articulate what you mean. It's where you articulate what you mean. Okay, I think that's dealing with all those questions. So maybe I'm going to give you a 2-minute warning. So NC, is there any mark for formats? Not really. I know it's some of the applied skills. You get maybe a mark for a report. It's obviously unprofessional not to do a report if you're asked to do one. So there would be potential marks not gained for not writing it, and your professional skills marks will be limited, but all professional skills marks are not for the format. Again, go onto the ACCA website, look at all the great information on what professional skills marks are awarded for. Do you have a role to play? Yes, you do, Lecky. Again, if you look at past exams, every single exam question that has been set asks you to perform a role. So again, have a look at the ACCA CBE platform and you will be fully familiar. The Godwin says the practice platform has some challenges making it difficult. I think a lot of that, Godwin, is all work in process and is being sorted out as we speak. So if you were looking at the platform 4 weeks ago, it's a different place to what it is today. How do I begin my answer in a report? Again, have a look at past answers and how they write in a report. But there is no hard and fast way of doing it. There's a, because different companies present letters, reports in different ways. But the point is you need to be professional. Will a spreadsheet and SBL be used? Yes. If you look at the exams on the practice platform, you will see that there is a spreadsheet section. What you would do on SBL is do your calculations in the spreadsheet section and then have sort of see exhibit 1 in the spreadsheet. So don't do your calculations in the word processing area, do them in the spreadsheet area. Do you have to maintain a... Yes, if you're asked to behave in a certain way, yes, you do. You find it off-putting to be a consultant rather. The question asks you to be a consultant. If you don't answer the question that's asked, then you won't get the marks, Lecky. Yeah. With regards to a structure, would follow read it once, read it twice. A structure that would help you answer would normally be a model, or what would you do in the workplace? Again, I've answered the question, Mukesh, on conclusion. If you're just joining, it will be in the recording. Okay, so that's my 2-minute warning. Thank you very much for that. I hope that makes sense. Maybe we've talked quite quickly because I've tried to get a lot in, and it might be a good idea when you get a link to the recording to go back through this again and dwell on each of those slides, what I want you to do, because I wanted to get as much in as I could, hoping that you will actually review this afterwards. So I'm now going to hand you over to Hazel.
Thank you so much, Sean. And I am going to ask everyone a quick question. So I've put a poll on your screen, and I want to know if you know when the pre-September 2025 mock exam and debrief videos will be released. So you should be able to see the question on your screen, and you can have 4 options. So do you think it's the 9th of August for both, the 8th of August for mocks and 16th for debrief videos, the 8th of August for mocks and the 15th for debrief videos, or are you just not sure when those mock exams will be released? So ACCA does release a set of mock exams every session. So do you know when those mock exams will be released? That's great. I can see that we do have some questions coming in. So if you want to quickly pick your answers, and we'll see what the correct answer is next. Oh, I can see there's some. I'm just going to wait till we get to maybe half of the group. We have a really good number of students on today. So if you're not sure, then don't be scared to pick no idea. I am going to give you the answer. So you're in the right place if you're not sure. But what do you think? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so the answer is the third option. So it's the 8th of August and the 15th of August. So the mock exams are already out on the practice platform, and the debrief videos will be released this Friday on the YouTube channel. So we do recommend that you do the mock exam before looking at the debrief video. It works best for yourself to prepare yourself for your exam. And finally, we just want to do a quick recap on the best 3 resources that you can use to equip yourself for your exam. So firstly, as Sean has shown today, the CBE Practice platform, which it contains specimen and past exam content, and you can self-mark your answers within the platform using marking guides and sample exams, and you can track your performance, which will give you good confidence boost while you're getting ready for your exam. Secondly, we have our ACCA Study Resources YouTube channel, and on here you can find the latest videos to help you prepare for your exam. So I know somebody was asking about videos, and this is the place to go. So for example, you can find videos on how to perfect your exam technique and exam specific guidance and topic explainer videos that will help build your confidence. And finally, we have the ACCA Study Hub, which is free and has resources that are of an online study content which covers the full syllabus. You can find short quizzes to test your understanding as you progress through, and there's also practice and revision questions and flashcards that will help you on your lead up to the exam. So that brings us to the end of today's live session, and I hope you found it really helpful and picked up some useful tips from Sean. Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder to check out the resources section. They're super handy in your preparing and your while you're preparing for your exam. And don't worry if you missed anything. As Sean said, we moved quite quickly, but everyone will get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and you can watch the session again. Thank you, Sean, for providing your valuable insights today, and also to the team in the background that have supported the delivery of this session. And finally, we just want to wish you all a good luck for your exams.
Best of luck.